Hi, everyone. I'm Erica Andrews, a senior consultant at Applied Self-Direction. Thank you so much for joining us today for this member webinar called Disabling Ableism, Tips for Partnering with Disabled People. I'm just going to run through a couple of quick housekeeping issues before we begin. Your audio and video have been automatically turned off. If you do have any questions or comments, please just submit those via the Q&A box on the bottom toolbar. We'll address as many of your questions as possible at the end of the session. And the session is being recorded and it will be available on our website following today's session. If you experience any audio or technical issues during today's webinar, you can send us a message by using the Q&A pod or by emailing us at membership@asd.com. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Bring up the slides. So as I said, you are in a webinar called Disabling Ableism, Tips for Partnering with Disabled People. I hope that's where you meant to be. If not, you can jump off. The next slide, as I told you guys, I am Erica Andrews, and I'm a senior consultant with Applied Self-Direction, but I also thought you might want to know a little bit more about me and why I was chosen to do this webinar. And it's not just because my coworkers love me and think I'm really cool. I am actually kind of a little bit qualified to do this webinar. Besides working at Applied Self-Direction, I also own a business called Empowering You. And that business helps people to get the most out of their services so they can basically get the most out of their lives. I do a lot of support brokering and just helping disabled people. I also have spinal muscular atrophy and have managed my own care since moving out on my own in 1995. For 8 years, I was also an IRIS consultant. It's what we call like care managers in Wisconsin, and helped people self-direct their own services and their lives. And I hold degrees in communication, marketing, and human resources. So I've worked in many aspects and areas of self-direction, except for I have not actually worked in FMS, which is good because I can barely figure out the time cards for my own employees, much less do payroll for all of them. So I'd like to say a special thank you to all of the FMS people that are here today and just welcome everyone. So thanks for joining me today. A little bit about this webinar for the next slide. This presentation is geared towards support brokers, but it is applicable to anyone, disabled or not, can learn from this webinar. I actually collaborated with some people with developmental disabilities to make this webinar, and I learned a lot of things also. So I'm hoping that you guys will too. There are many different kinds of disabilities and experiences, though. I want to just point that out. And it's really not possible to fully represent everyone's perspective. So this training is just a compilation of my own experiences, as well as numerous discussions with others who have different disabilities. As an organization, Applied Self-Direction focuses on self-direction. So we are taking these topics mostly in the context of support brokers interacting with clients. And the basic principles will translate to most anyone, even if you aren't directly involved in self-direction. Although we hope you are, because the more the merrier on the self-direction train, right? But I also want this to be a really fun webinar, so I'm not trying to offend anyone. The words and language that I choose to use are my preferences as a disabled woman. When you run your own webinar, you can use whatever language you would like. I also want this to be a fun and interactive webinar, so please feel free to send over questions and comments through that Q&A spot that we talked about, especially if those comments are telling me what a great time you're having and how good this webinar is. I'm just kidding. So the things we're going to go through today, we're going to just go through some basics of where things began and what is ableism. We're going to talk about the importance of language. We're going to talk about some common mistakes that maybe happen or that I've experienced from my years in self-direction. And then we're going to talk about some tips for successful communication to avoid those mistakes. And then I'm going to give you some additional resources, and then hopefully we're going to have time for questions and answers. So for starters, we're just, this little poster here says how to treat people with disabilities. just treat them like you would like people. Literally, that's it. There's no special formula. There's no special thing to do. It's really just treat everyone like a human. So that's how I wanted to start. And then I just want to do a quick little video here to get things going. Okay. I know I saw a lot of you saying that the sound wasn't working, and it wasn't working for me either, but hopefully you guys could read quickly to see those comments. But we're going to go through a lot of those comments also throughout this presentation. It was just kind of a funny little way to start off the presentation and break the ice. So we're going to go to the next slide and talk about the basics and do a really quick overview so that we're all on the same page. Basics of ableism. Ableism is defined as the discrimination and social prejudice against people with physical or mental disabilities. I think we all knew that. Ableism is just discriminating against people with any sort of disability. Ableism defines people by their disabilities, and it also classifies disabled people as inferior to non-disabled people. Ableism also causes people to assign or deny certain perceived abilities or skills. So for example, disabled people are helpless and need non-disabled people to help them at all times would be something that maybe is an ableistic view. Or disabled people need protecting from other people. Or if a person doesn't use words to communicate, they're less intelligent or have nothing to say. These are all kind of examples of ableistic views. So that's the basics of ableism that we're going to go. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but I also just want to talk about like the beginnings of self-direction and living independently. Before self-direction and in the independent living movement, there were really only a few institutional settings that people could live in. Nursing homes, hospitals, residential care facilities, things like that. With the addition of home and community-based settings, now people can live in their own home, an adult foster home, an adult family home, or a group home. They can live in so many other better options, in my opinion, obviously, that there are just a lot better options and a lot more wonderful places for people to be living in. So prior to the ADA and prior to self-direction, disabled people were treated as less than human. If families couldn't take care of the person was put into an institution. And families were actually encouraged to put people in institutions When I was born, and I was born in the 70s, I will tell you guys, my parents were actually encouraged to put me in an institution because I would just be a burden and I'd be too much work for them. And I know that none of you know my parents, but I am just going to guess that the doctor probably might have come away with a black eye for that suggestion, but I don't know. My mom didn't tell me. Also, people were locked away in these institutions, oftentimes, unfortunately, changed to beds, left naked, soiling themselves, not being fed, things like that. They were seen as scary or possessed by the devil. They had segregated classrooms. It was okay to say things like, I'm not hiring you because you're disabled, or you're not allowed into this establishment, or your service dog is not allowed in this establishment because you're disabled. There was very little to no transportation for disabled people, and there were no curb cuts. You couldn't get on enough sidewalks. Then in the late 1970s, the independent living movement came, and people realized that all human life has value, and every human being should have a meaningful options and be able to make choices pertaining to issues that affect their lives. This is quite a novel idea, isn't it? But it is a really great movement that started it all. And then many of you know that the Americans with Disabilities Act came in 1990 after following that. So many strides and things have been coming for disabled people. So some of the benefits of self-direction, I know I'm biased since my whole life and my job revolve around self-direction, but it really is a wonderful thing. So some of the benefits include self-directing participants are up to 90% more likely to be very satisfied with how they lead their lives. So living in your own home or living in a place you choose, you're going to be more likely to actually be happy with your life. That doesn't really seem like rocket science either. Self-direction also significantly reduces unmet needs for personal care and other care. Primary caregivers were significantly more satisfied with their lives in general, providing care to people in their home as they choose. And also, self-direction did not result in an increased use of Medicaid funds or abuse of participants, as many people think. That if if people are able to manage their own home and their own lives, they will just be taken advantage of and or misuse funds. So that is a really quick overview about kind of the independent living movement and where disabled people have come from to now. I know it's super quick overview, but I just kind of wanted to set the ground for where we're at today and just remind people that things were pretty bad before. And now we're going to shift a little bit and talk a little bit about the importance of language. Excuse me, sorry. So first, some fun facts about disability. Did you guys know that the disability community is the largest minority group? Everyone is represented, all ages, genders, religions, socioeconomic levels, and ethnicities. And the disability community is the only minority group that anyone can join at any time. Because of all these things, webinars like this are so important. The language we use is also so important. So much of a person's self is tied to the words and language that is used. There's been a lot of discussion lately about person-first language versus identity-first language. The proponents of identity-first language argue that person-first language is basically reminding people that disabled people are also people as well. I don't feel like I should have to remind you that I'm a person. Although person-first language is supposed to acknowledge personhood, it also implies that disability or disabled are negative, derogatory words. So we suppress the individual's identity as a disabled person because we're saying that the disability is something inherently bad, like a disease. I don't believe that my disability is bad. Yeah, losing strength and not being able to take myself to the restroom do kind of stink. But my disability has also helped me to become the strong, independent person I am today. I'm sure my parents would like some credit for that as well, but really the struggles and obstacles I've had to overcome because of the disability have shaped me. You've probably noticed that for the most part, I choose to use identity-first language. I feel like identity first language embraces a disability as a part of the person. A disabled woman is a very large part of who I am. It's not the only thing I am, however. I'm also a friend, an aunt, a consultant, a business owner, and a lot of other things. However, you aren't going to see me in person and not realize I'm also disabled. The 300-pound wheelchair is a bit hard to hide, so I just choose to embrace it. So as we talked about a little bit, person first language is an example would be person with a disability. It's the way to keep the emphasis on the person as a person and the disability as only part of the whole person. It focuses on the person and not implying the person is only their disability. However, identity first language would be an example of disabled person, and then it's talking about the disability as a central part of the person's identity. And it's a means of empowerment and claiming disability as a central component of the person. So in my experience, people who are without disabilities use person first language because I feel like people have a hard time saying disabled person to you because we've been trained for so long to say person first. But people who are disabled themselves, for instance, me, use identity first language. So that's just kind of my observation. But basically, the bottom line is, ask. What does the person want to be called? Ask the person what they want, what kind of language they prefer. People have really different opinions on which one is best and which one is the right one. But honestly, whichever side of the debate you come down on, you can't go wrong if you remain courteous, respectful, and observant that a disability is not a person is a person, right? So if we all just keep that in mind, we should be doing good. So going along with language and communication, we're going to talk a little bit about body language because it is a huge part of your communication, whether you mean it to be or not. So some things to keep in mind while you're meeting with a participant or talking with a participant, making sure we are smiling, but making sure it's a very genuine smile that like, hi, I'm here to help you. I'm excited to meet with you. Not a pity, like, oh, poor you. I'm so sorry for you. Smile. You all know what I'm talking about when I say that. Sit where the participant is comfortable and can see you. Be aware of personal space boundaries and preferences. Obviously, some people might need more space. Some people might not want people as close to them. I'm a hugger, so you can sit on my lap for all I care. I don't really have any personal space boundaries, but I mean, when you get lifted and have people in your space 24/7, you can't really have personal space boundaries really. But also be aware of physical boundaries. For instance, I cannot turn my head to the left very well. I also don't know my right from my left very well, so I had to figure out which way that was that I couldn't turn my head. So I always ask people to sit on my right or across from me. So just making sure that you're sitting somewhere that the person can see you, making sure that you can you're giving head nods and leaning in and other clues that you are actually listening. I have to say that not being able to see any of your faces or your smiles or your head nods, which I hope is what you're doing right now, is very, it's really throwing me off. I'm very much feed into that. So making sure that you have your arms at your side or on your lap, they're not crossed in front of you with an angry scowl. Make sure you're facing the person that you're talking to, not, looking down or looking at your phone or something like that. Also keeping your hands away from your mouth. Some people do read lips or need that visual cue to figure out what you're saying, but also you're not going to be speaking clearly if you have your hand over your mouth. And then a couple of things you would want to avoid would be sitting behind a computer or a desk. If you are there to try to make a conversation and learn about this person and learn about their lives, you can help them create a plan that's going to help them live their best life. If you're sitting behind a computer the whole time and that's in front of you and blocking you, that's not going to really help make that conversation and that connection. Also, if you're just slouching in your chair and not looking like you're interested, I have a rod in my back, so I can't slouch in my chair, but I can still bend, lean to the side or something like that. If you're making faces at things people say, obviously that would be terrible. As we talked about, not keeping your arms crossed, your hands on your hip, making it look like you're in an authoritative position or things like that. And obviously, please don't ever scowl or roll your eyes at someone. Excuse me. A couple of different word choices we can talk about here. Instead of saying caseload, maybe say participant count. Instead of saying case manager, maybe say person, partner, support coordinator, or service coordinator. If you guys take anything else, if you take nothing else away from this webinar, please try to take case out of your vocabulary. I really cannot stand that word because I'm actually a person and not a case to you. A lot of people, when I was working as a iris consultant, would say that they gave a service to a participant. You don't own the service, you didn't give anything, you added a service to the plan, perhaps. Also, to describe a person in the program, please don't ever say patient. To be honest with you, I'm not actually super patient at all, so you probably wouldn't want to call me that, but we could just use maybe just person. If that isn't working, we need somebody to distinguish. We could use maybe partner or consumer. Wheelchair bound, instead of saying that, there's no ties. I'm not like handcuffed to my wheelchair. I'm not bound and gagged in here. You could just say uses a wheelchair user, person who has a mobility disability, things like that. I just got back from a summer camp for adults with physical disabilities, and we had a lot of young people being as volunteers, which is wonderful. I love opening it up to new people, but a lot of times they asked if we would watch their camper while they ran to the bathroom or did something. And I always wondered why I needed to watch them. Were they going to do tricks? Are they going to just do a cartwheel for me really quick? Or what were they doing? So instead, maybe of saying you're watching someone or you're, doing something, maybe you could just say you're providing care, you're providing companionship, you're supporting someone. My caregivers like to say they're hanging out with me, they're things like that. So going along with language, we're going to talk about a couple of things that should not be said. These may seem really obvious, but unfortunately, I have heard them all. I've heard people say, I wish I could sit down all day. Oh, really? Do you wish that? Do you also wish that you weren't able to take yourself to the bathroom and you had to ask for help with everything? I wish I had someone else to do everything for me. I mean, I'm not going to lie, this one is actually kind of a perk because, my laundry is being done right now while I'm meeting with all of you. But it also just shouldn't be said because I didn't choose to have someone else do my laundry. I would love to be able to do it myself. I just can't. I've had iris consultants say things like, if this house isn't clean, I'm going to have to report you or write you up because you're obviously not doing your job. But you have absolutely no idea what's happened in that person's life before you got into that home that day. Maybe the participant was upset and tore the living room apart, and that's why the house is not clean. So just being careful what you're saying. People like to ask me if I have a license to drive that thing, or did I pass my driving test? Would you ask a person walking if they had a drive, if they had a permit to do that? I know there are a lot of people out there who shouldn't even be driving a car, and you don't ask them that. So you shouldn't probably be asking me. People saying, slow down, Speedy. Yeah, okay. Are you gonna ask somebody who's jogging by you to slow down? Or they say want to race or some other, thing saying that I'm going too fast and I'm on wheels and not just walking. People have asked, can I get a ride on that thing? I mean, would you ask someone for a piggyback ride if you're just walking by them? I don't think you would do that. So why would you ask me if you can essentially jump on the back of me and take a ride? Or I love this one. You're too pretty to be disabled. I didn't actually realize that you had to not be pretty to sit down. And I'm not saying that because I want you to know that people think I'm pretty. I'm just saying that I think it's really silly that you think that all people who are disabled are just like crazy, like just really terrible looking people. So other things that should not be said, these are more things said to workers or things like that. I give you credit because I could never live like that. So thank you for telling me that my life is terrible and I just shouldn't be able to live like this. Or things just saying I could never ask for help with fill in the blank, whatever it is, help with going to the bathroom, help with getting dressed, help with things like that. I don't really have a choice. It's either that or I just live in bed and waste away, right? Or I've had people say things to my workers like, I give you credit because I could never do that type of work, which, thank you for telling me that I'm disgusting and you could never help me. I've heard coworkers of mine saying that people don't need nice things like nice furniture or nice beds or things like that because they're incontinent and they're going to ruin it anyway. Well, just because someone has accidents doesn't mean that they don't deserve great things. They don't have to go to Goodwill and buy the couch that's on one leg or things like that. I think that's just a really ableistic view. I once had a nurse that came in to visit me after I had just been to Mexico with my family on vacation, and she stated it must be nice to live off the government and be able to go on vacations. Not very nicely, I'm not gonna lie, actually. I not very nicely told her that I work for full time to go on vacations and the government had nothing to do with it. When I worked as an iris consultant, I heard a lot of people offhandedly using the word fraud. And unfortunately, that can really ruin some relationships because math is hard. So people aren't really trying to commit fraud. They're just trying to do the time cards and live life. Many times when I'm out and doing things, I have a lot of people that tell me, I'm so glad you're getting out. Like the woman said in the video, yeah, grocery shopping is super inspirational. If any of you know me, you know that I don't actually ever stay home. I have just been on vacation for 2 weeks at different camps and doing different things. And so it's just funny to me whenever people say it's so nice to see me out because I probably get out more than your average non-disabled person. I had a friend once who was at a meeting and she stood up to grab something with her care coordinator there, and her care coordinator stated, well, if you can stand up, why do you need to be in this program, or why do you need that wheelchair? And she replied back that she is pretty lazy and her parents were rich, so she thought, why the heck not get a wheelchair? And then of course she did explain that that was not true, but I just was appalled that somebody would ask her that. So moving away from communication, we're going to now talk about a few things that my friends and I have experienced from our consultants or nurses or screeners that come in to help with this program, and things I'm hoping you guys are not doing or saying. We've had people who are deciding the program isn't right because of a certain disability. This is actually considered gatekeeping and it should really never happen. If you're deciding that someone who has a developmental disability just shouldn't be able to be in self-direction because it will be too hard, that's actually not your decision to make at all and not something you should be deciding. Also, mentioning self-direction, that might be for the participant if they make one mistake or they're going through a rough patch. Right now, there is a nationwide caregiving crisis. So people are having a hard time finding caregivers and having a hard time getting staff. So people are being forced into agencies and being forced to go back to traditional services and not self-direction. But it's really not fair that you're just getting pushed into that when it's actually because of a nationwide crisis, not anything the person is doing. A lot of times I have the presumption of incompetence. Because I'm disabled, I must be incompetent and I'm not able to, I don't have intelligence and I'm not able to do many things. I graduated I have 2 bachelor's degrees from college and I have done a lot of things in my life, so I'm not incompetent. I've also heard and seen a lot of coworkers trying to force a representative on someone just because they think they can't do it themselves. They can't self-direct. I've seen a lot of people trying to be a boss, not a partner when being a support broker. So just telling participants how things are going to happen. This is what you're going to do and this is how you're going to do it, instead of asking the participant how they would like to do it or how they would like to handle things. Giving opinions when opinions aren't asked. You should never start a sentence with, well, I think, unless you are asked to do so. Giving advice and again, expecting it to always be followed also is a big thing. As a support broker, obviously you are going to be giving advice and you are going to be, helping people think of solutions and be problem oriented or solution oriented, I mean. But it doesn't mean that all of your solutions are always going to be followed. There may be some solutions that are come up by the participant or by someone else that will be chosen instead. And then a couple more things for not respecting the person as a person, just really dehumanizing people. For the next slide. Are they dehumanizing people and focusing on paperwork instead of the person? Just remember that behind all the paperwork, there is a person. Or not telling people about services that will require more work. When I was an iris consultant, we, sorry, I think I skipped something. So, yeah, when I was an iris consultant, we had to do budget amendments if people wanted extra services. And a lot of my coworkers wouldn't tell people that budget amendments were available just because they didn't want to have to actually do a budget amendment, because it did take, 3 or 4 hours of your time. But that's just terrible because the budget amendments were what got people extra services and they should be done. So just remembering that everything you're doing and every piece of paper and everything that happens, there is a person behind that needs to get that done. I always find it amusing when people talk louder or slower to me. I actually talk super fast and I expect people to keep up with me. I'm really trying right now to not talk super fast, but I just find it funny because my legs don't work. My ears work just fine and I can hear you and you don't have to talk slower. And I don't understand why people think that if you yell at me, I will understand you better. If someone does have a hearing impairment, I would assume that talking like louder isn't actually going to help with that. Maybe slowing down so people can read your lips would help, but again, you can just ask the person about that. It drives me crazy when people finish sentences for someone else, especially people who do have speech delays or don't use words to communicate. I'm definitely a proponent of repeating what the person says or paraphrasing to make sure I'm understanding what they're saying. But if they're having a hard time getting it out, I would never finish the sentence, because you would never finish the sentence of someone who doesn't have a disability, I doubt. So why would you do it for someone with a disability? Also, just assuming that the person knows and understands what's being said because you explained it well. As a support broker or care coordinator or anything like that, you do explain things and you think you explained them well and you think you did them fully, but you don't know what the other person heard and you don't know what the other person understood. And as a support broker for someone here in Wisconsin, I called the iris consultant to see, what the situation was, what was going on, why the participant worker was being terminated, because I didn't understand. Usually the financial agencies do not decide that. And when I called the iris consultant, she said she knows what she did. First of all, why would you ever answer like that in the first place? Because that's just a crazy answer. And second of all, I just think that it's a little crazy to just presume that they understand just because you think you said it well, but you don't know what people understand and what they don't. So I think it's just really important to remember that. Also putting words in the participant's mouth or saying that they said things or how they said things like that. Or, excuse me, assuming that if a person doesn't use words to talk, that they have either nothing to say, they don't communicate, they're less intelligent, or they're any less of a person. I worked with several people who did not use words to communicate. And even though there weren't words that were not necessarily spoken, they were communicating. I had one woman that would flip her table over in front of her if she did not like what you were saying. So let me tell you, I knew when she was not happy. So there's nothing, just because you're not using words to communicate does not mean that you don't have things to say. So I just put this funny little picture in here, just saying, hello there, sweetie. Are you having a good day? And what are you up to today? And then the person in the wheelchair says, please don't mistake my wheelchair for a high chair. There's so many times that as a disabled person, I am considered a child or a, just somebody with less intelligence just because I'm using a wheelchair or just because I'm not using words to communicate or things like that. So just reminding people that we are all adults and should be respected and treated like adults. Other ways of not respecting the participant as an adult is not talking to the participant as if they are not there, especially for people who do not use words to communicate. So people are talking to the family member or friend or whoever else is in the room and referring to the participant as she or the participant or they or things like that. And so we want to make sure we're not doing that. And again, talking to the participant like they're a child, or patting the person on the head. I understand I'm very short. I use a wheelchair. I'm only 5 feet tall to begin with, but then I use a wheelchair. So this happens to me all the time. But just because I'm short and you can reach my head does not mean you should pat it. Also, lots of people don't think I should be out on my own. I do have 24-hour care, so I don't really go out anywhere on my own because, well, I need help when I go anywhere anyway, so I don't usually go anywhere. And I'm also a very social person, so I like people with me. But it shouldn't be assumed that just because we're in a wheelchair, we can't go anywhere by themselves. I have many friends that drive themselves and do everything. I have been many times, my friends have been mistaken as my relatives. I have a 6 foot tall, blonde hair and blue eyed, my best friend. And everyone always asks if she's my sister. I'm just wondering how we would be sisters. And then also we kind of talked about this a little bit, but just deciding that you have to be the participant's protector, that a parent will take advantage of them or the direct service professional will take advantage of them. Most of the time, the parents and the workers are just trying to live life and do the best they can for the participant, actually. And then not respecting the participant as an individual. We're comparing people with this in the services they needed. We're just assuming all people with the same disability are the same and need all of the same services. I've had case managers, or oops, I used that word, care coordinators who would say, oh, I have somebody else with muscular dystrophy that doesn't need that service. Well, I'm not that person. So also thinking that the person's needs more than they do. I ran into so many iris consultants when I was working that said that a participant didn't need this or didn't need that. And I just wondered how they knew that, because they didn't live in the person's body or their person's lives. Or they would also decide that people could do things that they have said they couldn't. Maybe they can walk, but they can't walk for 10 minutes. So the iris consultant would see them walking and decide that they were lying. Also thinking that you know everything about a disability just because you've worked with one person with that disability. Every person is so different. As I said, I just came from a camp for physical disabilities. I also just came from a camp for adults with muscular dystrophy. And there are, I think it's 65 neuromuscular diseases under muscular dystrophy, but even people with the same muscular dystrophy type, like I have spinal muscular atrophy, none of us are the same, none of us need the same, none of us act the same. So just realizing that everyone is an individual. And not giving the full information about what services available in the program because you think the services aren't needed or appropriate. We kind of talked about that. But I've also seen where iris consultants or things like that wouldn't tell people that, for instance, lawn mowing was on there or snow shoveling because they thought it was good for the participant to get out and do it themselves. That's just not your decision to make. And then also just remembering that success looks very different for everyone. For some people, success might be being able to go to McDonald's and eat for an hour and not have, not be anxious or not have any sort of anything happen. But for other people, maybe, getting a full-time job and working and being out in the community is a success. So everyone is different and every person is an individual. We just have to remember that. And then not respecting the participant's time. So calling at the last minute to make required contacts or to schedule appointments. I used to have an iris consultant that would call me on Monday and tell me that the week had gotten away from her and she needed to schedule a visit by Friday. And I would make sure to tell her that I'm sorry, but that was not my issue and that I did have other things. And then she would get upset with me when I wasn't available or didn't answer my phone. And she would remind me that, answering the phone and being part of and doing visits was part of the program. I reminded her that being mutually respectful of each other and each other's time was also part of the program. So as you guys can imagine, she is no longer my iris consultant. I understand that people have to reschedule and cancel appointments. Things come up. We are all human, like I just said, but just making sure that it doesn't happen all the time or often. Unfortunately, a lot of people are very routine oriented and do need you to be there on time when you say you're going to come. My person who takes care of my breathing mask right now, her first appointment she scheduled with me was at 11 a.m. She showed up at 12:30 with no call or no text or anything to say she wasn't on her way. And then she told me she could have talked to my caregiver because I had to go into a meeting and wasn't able to meet with her. And she told me she could just talk to my caregiver. And I proceeded to remind her that it was my care and my life and that I would be talking to her. And she said, okay, and then went in to check my machine because I was sitting out in the sun. I like to do that as much as I can. Walked in and proceeded to promptly ask my caregiver what supplies I needed. So she and I had a really great talk about being respectful of time and being respectful of my preferences to direct my own care and not have other people be asked. And then also while you're in meetings, just making sure you don't have your phone on or you're talking during the meetings or you're, taking other calls. I once had a cardiologist who ordered an entire car while I was on the phone with him. I listened to him pick the color, the model, make everything. I already didn't like the guy because he thought my boyfriend, who was only 5 years younger than me, was my son when we got in there. But then I really didn't like him when he was ordering the car in our visit. Also making sure we're not rushing the meetings or dragging out meetings because that can really not be fun for the person doing with the meeting. And then also just not respecting the participant's privacy and space, just going through the house without permission or asking. I had a DME provider who both walked in on my caregiver in the bathroom and my boyfriend in a business meeting because she just started walking down the halls and opening doors without asking. So that was, we also had a chat. I understand that you have to, if you're a nurse oversight visit, you have to see personal cares, but you really don't have to go see the most intimate cares. You also don't really have to ask invasive questions. There's no reason that you need to know if I can have children or things like that. Also, making sure we're not freely giving out information about the participant. I have had a lot of family members when I was an iris consultant just tell me way too many things about their participant, about the person in the program, things that I didn't need to know, medical things like that. I also have a really weak stomach, so I don't really want to know those things anyway. Also, leaning on the participant's chair, you wouldn't go up to someone and lean on their shoulder. So why are you leaning on someone's chair? Helping without being asked is kind of a controversial thing because you want to come in and save the day and grab that door, or grab that pen for someone. But if I didn't ask you to help me, please don't help me because maybe I feel really good when I can reach the door myself and open it or things like that. Or getting really close to me when I'm talking. Again, I don't need your face in my face when we're talking. And then kneeling to talk to me without being asked. Now, this one is definitely a controversial subject. Some people think it's rude to stand above and not kneel, some disabled people. Other people, I included, think it's weird to kneel down to talk to me because you probably wouldn't kneel to talk to a child or like maybe a child because they're 2 feet tall, but you wouldn't kneel to talk to a teenager who's younger than you, or if you have a friend who's like 5 feet tall, you wouldn't kneel down to talk to them. So why are you getting down on one knee to talk to me? So I personally think it's weird, but that is something, again, that you would probably want to ask. If you notice that the person is really straining to look up at you, maybe you want to squat down or kneel down. But my boyfriend is 6 feet tall, and he never kneels down to talk to me. And we seem to communicate just fine. Other common mistakes are just not maintaining professionalism. I had a friend whose Irish consultant told her all about her marital problems and the divorce that she was having. Like, that's not something I need to know. Again, giving opinions on everything and everything in the person's life is not really your job. Making sure we're modeling appropriate behavior, because some people do learn by what they see. So we don't want to be, again, taking phone calls or looking at our phone in the middle of meetings, because then they would think that that's inappropriate behavior. Or forcing your beliefs on others. I feel like this was huge during COVID. I had a lot of participants who I had differing views during COVID, and that's fine because we're all humans and we're all entitled to our own view. So I just did a lot of smiling and nodding, but I do know that I heard from a lot of my friends in the program that their consultants were trying to push their beliefs and feelings about it onto them. And then also just deciding your way is the only way to do things. That's not really how it should work as a support broker. You should be maintaining objectivity, actually. So making sure you're not coming in with your mind made up on a decision. You're going to want to address the issue by asking questions to get more information, and then avoid assuming the worst. We are all humans. We all make mistakes. So we're not trying to commit fraud. Other common mistakes that can happen are just trying too hard to make a connection, saying, oh, I have a cousin with MS, so I totally get it. First of all, having someone that you know with disease is not the same as actually living it yourself. And second of all, MS and MD are not the same thing, and that happens all the time. Also, people just assume that I know everyone with MD. Actually, people think I know everyone with MS as well. But I do really like to make new friends, and everyone I think that has MD and I see them out in public, I always go up and try to talk to them. So I might probably know them. Also, just saying that you had used a scooter once, so you get it, not the same thing, even a little bit. Making sure we're not holding meetings in a place that would maybe portray authority or represent an imbalance of power, kind of like what we talked about, not sitting behind a computer or a desk and having the participant sit on the other side or in a smaller chair or something like that. Also thinking that the lack of follow through equals lack of motivation. You have no idea what that person's week or day or anything was like, that's for sure. And also behaviors are not due to a lack of follow through or poor parenting. Unfortunately, I've heard from friends that is what's assumed a lot of times, and that is definitely not the case. And then telling me that my disability is just the worst thing ever, that they just couldn't imagine living like that, like we talked about. It's making sure we're practicing compassion and empathy, not pity. Don't be inspired by me living my normal life, and don't call people brave for living. I really have no other choice but to live. So then some tips for actual successfully communicating is just to remember that the participant is the boss and number one priority and in the driver's seat. And that all of us, every person, are created equal and deserve equal respect. Don't always just assume, make sure you're asking. Making sure we're teaching in self-direction, not just doing or not just taking over. All of us have the right to be able to learn new things. And then asking yourself the tough questions, to making sure that you're being the best support you can for the participant. So asking yourself things like, is there a reason why I'm doing this myself instead of teaching it? Is this a conflict of interest that I'm helping this participant? Am I providing the full picture for the participant? And am I providing an accurate picture? Also being aware of your biases, educating yourself on the roots of them and then where they came from, and then actively working to engage these feelings, even though it's uncomfortable. So you can be comfortable with being uncomfortable, figuring out why you're thinking those things and how you can get through them. Making sure you're approaching feedback if somebody says anything to you with curiosity instead of just getting all defensive about it. maybe learning about the cultures and values of the people you're supporting, making sure we're thinking outside the box for solutions, and approaching every situation from every angle. And then a few more tips for success. If something is not working the first time, don't think that that means it won't work at all. And anything that happens, if there's an unsuccessful attempt, it doesn't mean that you're bad at your job or you're a bad support worker. It just means that that didn't work and we're going to try something new. If the participant doesn't do what you think you would do, it doesn't mean it's actually the wrong thing. It just means that they're an individual and they want to do their own thing. And also just remember that participants don't always have to do the right thing. It used to make me crazy when I helped run a supported apartment program for people, and there would be incident reports because the person didn't follow their diabetic diet, or they were drinking, or they smoked, or they swore. If you're having a bad day, have you ever just swore? That happens sometimes. I'm a disabled person. I'm not an angel. Trust me, I am not an angel. So I just think it's funny that people expect us to be perfect and happy and cheery and thankful at all times. And it is not your responsibility to protect the participant. I know that many of you probably just panicked a little that I said that, but I do agree that you must ensure safety, but that's all relative to every situation. We want to make sure we're not fixing, we're supporting. We also want to not try to fit the person into society, but help society to fit the person. So one last thought is just that there is no greater disability in society than the inability to see a person as more. And then there are a few additional resources that we've included on some different books or movies or TV shows that you guys might want to see. So that is everything. No, we don't have a ton of time left. But are there any questions that I can help answer?
Erica, this is Casey. I can read some of the questions we've gotten. One question is about terminology preference. What do you prefer between client versus consumer?
I guess personally, I would say client, only because I like to, okay, so this is just me and my power trip probably, but I like to say that I'm a client, right? And the client is always right. So I would prefer to use that. Consumer, I am a consumer of services, but also I think I just like that because I like I like to be able to go back and say that there's that old saying of the client is always right. But I did, when I first moved to Milwaukee, I worked at an independent living center here, and we called people consumers. And I always thought it was kind of strange, but that's what they did. So I guess there are so many different terms and so many different ways to call people that use programs. But I don't know if it's possible, but maybe just try to take a survey of the people that you work with. What would you like your title to be? What would you like to be called, and go with the majority?
So Erica, I'm seeing that there were a few comments about problems with the video audio. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. Do you want to try to show the video again, or we can just share the link later?
Sure, we can try to share it again.
Oh wait, before we do that, let me read a question that just came in. When writing, but not speaking to a specific person, would you recommend using person first or identity first language?
Again, I would definitely probably ask that person what they preferred. So if you're going to write a note about a visit note or something like that, I would say, hey, just we have to write all visits. Whenever I was an iris consultant, I would say, hey, I have to write a visit note about this. How do you want me to write it, or things like that. Again, I would always use disability first language or identity first language. But I think that it is hard for people who are not who do not have a disability themselves to switch to that. So I would just ask the person how they would prefer to be written about.
Great. And I can answer this next question that came in about the recording. So yeah, this webinar is being recorded and we will make it available on our website so that you can share it with others within your team. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions and the video was so funny. So why don't we try to show it again? Erica, can you just kind of nod to me if the audio is working for you this time?
Sure.
Okay, great. Let me share my screen. The video is a little under 2 minutes, so we'll have time to then come back and say goodbye.
Why are you in a wheelchair? I was in a car accident. Anything tragic happened in your life you'd like to talk about? Can you have sex? Yeah. Last I checked, there wasn't a lot of walking involved with having sex. Can you have children? Yeah, pretty sure I can. Have you ever thought about making your wheelchair look cool? You know, I did have spinners in my 20s. Very heavy. You should get a horn for it. Do you have a horn? Do you walk around with a horn? Excuse me. Do you have a license to drive that thing? Slow down or I'm going to give you a speeding ticket. Oh, the first time I've ever. Well, don't arrest me. Oh, okay. So when I was in middle school, there was this girl and she was in a wheelchair. Do you know her? I don't know everyone else who's in a wheelchair, but yes, actually, I have met that person. She's lovely. So good to see you out and about. Thank you. Yeah, errands are really inspirational. How do you go to the bathroom? With the door closed, how do you go to the bathroom? Hi, you don't know me, but can I pray for you? Sure, yeah, I'd love to win the lottery. In middle school, I twisted my ankle and I was in a wheelchair for like 2 weeks. So I like totally get what you're going through. Is that really the same? Shouldn't you be wearing a helmet? Oh, it's not a bicycle. Have you ever tried to walk? What a great idea. Let me try. No, didn't work. Ma'am, can you walk once we board the airplane or will you still need assistance? Is it a magic plane? You're too pretty to be in a wheelchair. Do you suddenly get ugly when you sit down? How do you go shopping? Frequently. Do you still get your period? Okay.
Yay, the video or the audio worked on that one. So thank you all so much for attending this webinar. I hope that it was helpful and I hope that you got some things out of it, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much.